Lesson 3, Running a Macro. In this lesson, we'll take a look at various ways to run the macro that you've recorded. You can use the macro dialog, you can use a shortcut key, you can assign it to an icon on the quick access toolbar, or you can run it from a button or any clip art. Well, let's get started. Back in lesson 2, we recorded a macro called Format Blue and put that in the Personal Macro Workbook. Now, if you open lesson 03, you'll see that I've taken that macro from the Personal Macro Workbook and put it here, so that way in case you hadn't worked through lesson 2, you'll still have access to this macro. I want to run the Format Blue macro, and unfortunately, let's say it was a couple months ago, I don't remember exactly what shortcut key I used. One way that we can get a complete list of the macros is to come to either the View tab and choose Macros, View Macros, or on the Developer tab, use the large Macros icon. You'll see in the tooltip that this is also accessible using Alt F8. If you're going to record a lot of macros, there's probably 3 or 4 shortcut keys that you're going to learn. Alt F8 is certainly one of those. If we choose the Macros icon, we're going to get to the Macro dialog box. And the Macro dialog box will have a list of all of the macros that are available to us. Now, you'll see by default it's showing me macros in all open workbooks, and in this case, there's only one macro available. Sometimes, though, I have some projects that I've written for clients where we have 30, 40, 50 macros, and if that workbook happens to be available and open in the background, I just have a massive list of macros here. It's a little frustrating to wade through that list, so sometimes I'll come in here and open this to say macros in this workbook, to limit it to only the macros associated with this workbook, or perhaps macros in the personal workbook. A great way to limit and filter this list to see one particular item. Well, one way to run the macro is to actually choose it here and click Run, and Excel will run that macro. If you remember from lesson 2, this macro basically takes the current cell and formats that cell using a certain color combination. Another way to run the macro is the shortcut key. Now, what if we've forgotten the shortcut key, or if we failed to assign a shortcut key when we recorded the macro? Well, again, we're going to come back into the macros dialog and choose the macro, but this time click Options. In the macro options, we can see what shortcut key is currently assigned to the macro, Control-Shift-B, and we can change that shortcut key. If I type Shift-F in there, it'll be assigned to Control-Shift-F. It's a great way to change the shortcut key, or even to assign a shortcut key if you hadn't assigned one when the macro is being recorded. So now I can choose a cell, press Control-Shift-F, and the macro will run. Another way to run the macro is to assign it to an icon. Now, in the old version of Excel, we could put that icon just about anywhere on the standard toolbar, the formatting toolbar. However, in Excel 2007, they've limited us that we can only add icons to the quick access toolbar. Well, we can only add them unless we want to get in and write some XML code. So for now, let's assume that we can only add icons to the quick access toolbar. What is the quick access toolbar? It's this tiny strip of real estate here right above the ribbon. It starts out with icons for save, undo, and redo. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to take that quick access toolbar and move it down below the ribbon. So I'm going to right click on the quick access toolbar and say show quick access toolbar below the ribbon. There's a couple of advantages here. The first advantage is that the icons are now much closer to our worksheet, so they're easier to get to. You'll also notice that we now have the full width of the screen to add icons. Much more room for icons than when it's up here above the ribbon. Okay, so we want to add an icon to the quick access toolbar. We're going to right click and say Customize Quick Access Toolbar. It takes us into a certain category in Excel options, the Customize category. And in this case, we're going to open the left drop down and choose Macros. Now, we get a list of all the macros available to us, and you see there's exactly one, the Format Blue macro. So choose that and click Add, and that's going to add this icon to the Quick Access Toolbar. It's a little disappointing that we're stuck with this flowchart icon. That's the default icon they use for all of the macros, but we can modify that. Choose the item in the right list box and then choose the modify button, and you see that you have about 150 different icons to choose from. Certainly not as many icons as we had in Excel 2003, where there were 4,096 different icons, but more icons than the similar dialog box in Excel 2003, where we were limited to perhaps 48 different icons. So we have to choose an icon here. None of them, of course, look exactly like Format Blue. Some of them are more blue, like for example, this cell is blue. The display name, this is the tooltip that will appear. So I can say mark cells for audit. Click OK and click OK. Now let's see what happens. You'll see that here in our quick access toolbar, we now have a brand new icon. If I choose a cell, I hover, it gives me a tooltip, mark cells for audit. When I click that icon, it goes ahead and runs the macro. So adding items to the quick access toolbar is a cool way to go. Now I want to show you something that's fairly clever in Excel 2007. In the Customize Quick Access toolbar, I'll remove that and go back to the Macros command. If we wanted this icon to be on the Quick Access toolbar only when this workbook is open, then before we add it to the Quick Access toolbar, we're going to go to the right side and say for Lesson 3. This way, the item is only there when we have Lesson 3 opened. So I'm actually going to add a separator, click Add, and then Format Blue, click Add. I'll go in and I'll modify the icon again. I'll choose an icon and type my tooltip. Click OK, click OK. And now you'll see that the item is there. I've added a separator to break it apart. That icon, however, will go away after I close Lesson 3. So it's a good way to get the icon there when the macro is available, but when the macro is not available, the icon will go away. Another way to run the macro is to assign it to a Forms button. Now the buttons are found on the Developer tab in the Insert drop-down under Form Controls. Let me show you how to add a Forms Control button. You click on the button, and then basically somewhere in your spreadsheet, you're going to draw a rectangular area. It has the wonderful name of Button 1. We'll have a chance to change that. We're going to assign it to the Format Blue macro. Click OK. Now, a couple of things. You want to make sure that before you try and edit the text in the button, that the button is selected. If I would click away from the button's now unselected, and if I would left click on it, it's going to run the macro. So you want to right click on the button to select it. You see the row of dots around the outside that says the button is selected. I can now click that text and type what the button will do, Format Blue. Another interesting thing here is that when I'm typing the text, I'm in text edit mode. In text edit mode, we have a series of diagonal lines around the button instead of the dots. If you would try and format the button now, for example, press Control 1, you only have access to changing the font and the font color. While that might be cool, there's far more options available. And so click on the diagonal lines to change them to dots. Now if we format this, you can either right click and choose Format Control or press Control 1. We have access to many different properties, and we can change the alignment on the button. We can change whether the size is a certain size. We can lock the aspect ratio and various other properties of the button. This controls whether the button stays where it is or whether it will move in size as we cut and paste rows. So a variety of things we can do here with this button. Click OK. If you assign a button and later need to change it to a different macro, easy enough to do. Right click the button and choose Assign Macro, and you can change which macro is assigned to the button. Click OK. So let's try this out. We choose a cell, click the button, choose a cell, click the button, choose a cell, click the button. You'll see the button is kind of a good way to go for when you're creating a workbook for someone else to use. I mean, if the macro is something that you're going to use all the time, you will remember Control-Shift-F is the way to run the macro. But as we're sending this out to other people for them to use, they'll benefit from having a button there that has a nice description on it. Okay, now one other way to run this macro is similar to using the button, but it turns out that we can actually use any kind of a shape or clip art in order to kick off the macro. So here we have Insert Shapes. We can choose any of these basic shapes. So we can choose maybe an arrow or something like that. Draw the arrow in. Now I want to add a little bit of text here, so I click the text box icon and type run the macro. We can do any kind of formatting of this shape, so we can change the outline color. We can change the fill color. And we can even add effects. Now, to run the macro, we're actually going to right-click the shape and again choose Assign Macro and assign this to Format Blue. So again, to test this, we choose a cell, click the shape, choose a cell, click the shape, choose a cell, click the shape. You can get fairly clever here. I've seen many workbooks from many different companies. In one case, they were building a workbook for the sales reps to fill out, and they really wanted to try and make it as friendly as possible. So they actually used some clip art in order to run the macro. So insert clip art. We'll search for run, and we can look for clip art on Office Online. So here's a picture of a runner. We'll copy that clip art. And go back to our spreadsheet and paste. So we now have a nice little bit of clip art there. We can resize that and right click and say Assign Macro. So any picture or clip art or anything on your worksheet can be used to run this macro. Now in the case of this company, they had actually used a picture of a wizard, and basically the wizard was pointing to the right, and they taught people when you click the wizard it will go on and perform the next step. Kind of a clever different way to run the macro. So we have many different ways to run the macro. You can use the macros dialog. Remember, that's Alt F8. That certainly is the most tedious way. You can assign it to a shortcut key. You can assign it to an icon on the quick access toolbar. You can assign it to a button on the worksheet, or actually assign it to a shape or any clip art on the worksheet. So many different ways to go to run the macro. Well, I hope you found this useful. In the next lesson, we'll talk about using the relative reference setting to make your macros work more often.
Looking to advance your career by acquiring new skills? Tired of expensive off-site training programs? Wish you could learn from the best instructors in the industry? Look no further than live lessons. Self-paced, personal video instruction by the world's leading technology publishers. Each live lesson comes with a DVD featuring 3 to 4 hours of instructor-led classroom training, sample program code that allows you to work along with your personal instructor, and an example-rich study guide. Live lessons allow you to watch the entire course from start to finish, or navigate directly to any of the individual lessons. You'll literally watch over the shoulder of your instructor as he shows you how to build state-of-the-art applications. Live lessons, the power of the world's leading technology experts at your fingertips. To learn more, visit mylivelessons.com today.